The first thing I saw was smoke coming out of my chimney. Not a little smoke either. Thick gray smoke rolling into the freezing Colorado air like somebody had been living in my mountain house for weeks. I slowed my Ford F-250 to a crawl, tires crunching over wet gravel while rain tapped against the windshield hard enough to sound like pebbles. My headlights cut through the fog and landed on a black Chevy Suburban parked beside my porch. I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter because that SUV sure as hell wasn't mine. Then the porch light flicked on. Warm yellow light spilled across the wet wood planks I rebuilt myself 3 months earlier. And right then, a little girl ran past the front window holding a stuffed rabbit. I just sat there staring at my own cabin like I was looking at somebody else's life. The smell of pine trees and wet dirt filled the truck cab while my engine idled in the cold. I'd bought that abandoned mountain house fair and square 4 months earlier after my divorce drained just about everything I had left. 27 acres outside Breckenridge. Off-grid water tank. Old stone fireplace. Quiet enough to hear snowfall at night. I hadn't even started renovations yet. I'd only come up once to inspect the roof and lock the place down before winter. Nobody was supposed to be there. Nobody. But now lights glowed through every window like Christmas morning. I killed the engine and stepped out into the cold. The mountain air bit straight through my flannel jacket. Somewhere in the trees I could hear wind rattling dead branches together like bones. My boots splashed through mud while I walked toward the porch. That's when I noticed the first thing that made my stomach drop. The lock was different. Brass instead of black steel. Somebody had changed my lock. You ever walk up to your own property and suddenly feel like a stranger? Let me know where you're watching from, because this story gets crazier every single minute. I pulled my keys out anyway. Maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe I'd grabbed the wrong cabin road in the fog. But deep down, I already knew. The key didn't fit. Not even close. From inside I heard plates clinking together. A TV. Playing softly. Somebody laughing. My cabin smelled like fresh firewood and cooked food now instead of dust and old cedar. Somebody had settled in. I knocked once. Hard. Everything inside went quiet. The silence felt electric. Then locks clicked. The door opened halfway, and there she stood. Patricia Thornwell. 50-something. Blonde hair perfect as always. Cashmere sweater. That fake neighborhood smile people use right before they ruin your life. I recognized her immediately from the HOA meeting during closing week. She looked me up and down like I was the problem standing on my own porch. You can't just show up here at night scaring children, she said. I honestly thought I misheard her. Rainwater dripped off my jacket while my brain tried to catch up with reality. Then a man stepped into view behind her carrying a coffee mug. Late 20s maybe. Beard. Sweatpants. Totally comfortable inside my house. Mom said the abandoned property transfer already went through, he said casually. Abandoned property transfer. Those 4 words hit harder than the cold. Patricia folded her arms. The cabin sat empty for years, she said. The HOA stepped in to help a family in need. I actually laughed for a second because it was so insane. Not angry laughter either. The kind you let out when your brain refuses to accept what's happening. I bought this place in August, I told her. I have the deed in my truck. Her smile froze for half a second. Just half a second. But I caught it. Then she pulled out her phone. Good, she said calmly. You can explain that to the sheriff. 10 minutes later, red and blue lights flashed through the foggy trees, while freezing rain soaked through my boots. Sheriff Donnelly stepped onto the porch with his flashlight, while Patricia stood beside him acting like some innocent grandmother protecting her family from a dangerous intruder. This him? The sheriff asked quietly. Patricia nodded. He arrived aggressive, she said. The children are terrified. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I handed the sheriff my driver's license, purchase documents, title paperwork, everything. The cold paper stuck to my wet fingers. Donnelly looked through it all carefully. Then he sighed. Mr. Holloway, he said, this looks like a civil occupancy dispute. That sentence made my blood run cold. Civil dispute. Meaning nobody was getting removed tonight. Meaning the strangers stayed inside my cabin while I stood outside in the rain holding proof I owned it. Patricia gave me this tiny little smile before shutting the door. And right before the curtain closed, I saw something hanging above the fireplace inside my living room. My father's photograph. The old hunting picture I left wrapped in a blanket upstairs. They'd unpacked my family things. They'd gone through every room in my cabin. And in that exact moment, standing there soaked in freezing mountain rain, I realized Patricia Thornwell didn't mistakenly think the house was abandoned. She knew exactly who owned it. I sat in my truck for almost an hour after the sheriff left. The heater hummed softly while cold rain slid down the windshield in crooked lines. Every now and then I looked up at the cabin windows glowing through the fog. My cabin, my fireplace, my kitchen, and strangers were walking around inside like they had lived there forever. The worst part was how normal they acted. Patricia's grandson sat on the living room floor watching cartoons while somebody moved around in my kitchen making coffee. I could even smell bacon drifting through the cracked window every time the wind shifted. That smell hit me harder than I expected because for one stupid second it felt like home again. Then reality punched me right back in the throat. I finally drove down the mountain around midnight, tires sliding a little on the wet road while my jaw stayed clenched so tight it hurt. The next morning I parked outside the diner in Fairplay where I always stopped after checking the property. The place smelled like burnt coffee and maple syrup. Old ranchers sat in the corner booths talking about snow coming early this year. Nobody there had any clue I had spent the night locked out of my own house like some drifter. My phone buzzed while I stirred creamer into my coffee. It was a county property alert email. At first I almost ignored it. Then I saw the address. My cabin address. My stomach tightened instantly. There had been a utility transfer request filed 3 weeks earlier. Electric and water. Somebody was trying to establish residency. That was when the whole thing stopped feeling crazy and started feeling planned. Patricia did not randomly help some struggling family. She was building paperwork, layer by layer. Utility bills, mail forwarding, occupancy claims. I knew exactly what game she was playing because mountain towns in Colorado had been dealing with this garbage for years. Vacation homes sit empty too long, and suddenly somebody claims they were maintaining the property. Most people panic and explode emotionally. That is exactly what scammers want. Angry people make mistakes. Paperwork wins. I learned that the hard way during my divorce. I pulled out the original deed packet right there in the diner booth. The paper still smelled faintly like printer toner from closing day. 27 acres transferred legally through Summit County Title and Escrow. Clean title. No liens. No occupancy agreements. No HOA authority over ownership transfer. I read every line twice while country music crackled softly through the diner's speakers overhead. Then something clicked in my brain. Patricia had never once sounded surprised the night before. Not when I showed up. Not when I mentioned the deed. Not even when the sheriff read my documents. She already knew the property belonged to me, which meant this was not confusion. This was strategy. I drove straight to the county clerk's office after breakfast. The hallway smelled like old paper and wet jackets from people tracking snowmelt inside. I requested every public filing connected to the property over the last 6 months. The clerk, an older woman named Denise with reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck, frowned while scrolling through records. "That is strange," she muttered quietly. "There was an inquiry from the Willow Creek HOA legal committee 2 months ago." I felt my pulse jump. "About what?" She turned the monitor slightly. "Vacancy status. Ownership verification. Access easement questions." My fingers tightened around the counter edge. Patricia had been investigating my cabin before I ever arrived that night. Denise lowered her voice. "You did not hear this from me, but your HOA president asks about abandoned properties constantly." There it was. The smell of somebody else's scam finally starting to surface. I walked back outside into cold mountain air that smelled like pine and melting snow. My boots crunched over road salt while one thought kept repeating in my head. Patricia did not just want my cabin. She wanted the land. The entire mountain ridge behind it had recently been approved for luxury trail expansion. Property values were exploding. Cabins that sold for $200,000 5 years ago were now worth nearly $1 million. Suddenly everything made sense. The pressure, the fake concern, the sheriff call, even the children inside the house. Families make better sympathy shields than empty rooms. My phone buzzed again while I stood beside my truck. Unknown number. I answered immediately. "Mr. Holloway," a male voice asked nervously. "My name is Eric. I live 3 cabins down from your property." I glanced toward the mountains automatically. "Okay." He hesitated for a second. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. "You need to know Patricia's family moved into your cabin the same week. She told everyone at the HOA meeting you abandoned it for good." Eric refused to talk over the phone after that. His voice stayed low and nervous like somebody might overhear him through the trees. "Meet me at Carson's Gas and Feed," he said. And do not drive straight to the cabin first. Then he hung up. I remember standing there beside my truck in the cold mountain wind staring at my phone screen while snowflakes drifted through the gray sky. Every instinct in my body wanted to drive back up there immediately and kick Patricia out myself. But anger is expensive. One bad decision, and suddenly you become the problem instead of the victim. That is exactly what people like Patricia count on. Carson sat off Highway 9 beside an old propane yard and a bait shop that smelled like gasoline and damp cardboard. Pickup trucks lined the parking lot. Muddy boots. Hunters grabbing coffee before heading into the hills. The kind of place where nobody cared what watch you wore as long as your truck started in winter. Eric was already sitting inside near the back window when I walked in. Mid-60s maybe. Gray beard. Weathered face. Carhartt jacket with sawdust still stuck to one sleeve. He looked like a man who had spent his entire life outdoors. The second I sat down, he glanced toward the windows first before speaking. "You really bought that place legally?" he asked. I slid the folded deed copy across the table. He studied it carefully while the waitress poured burnt coffee into thick, white mugs nearby. "Damn," he muttered. Then Patricia lied to everybody. My chest tightened immediately. What exactly did she tell people? Eric leaned back slowly. At the September HOA meeting, she said the property owner vanished after inspection problems came up. Claimed county taxes were unpaid. Said the place was becoming dangerous. I almost laughed again because it was so ridiculous. I had automatic tax payments directly through escrow. "That is not even remotely true," I said. "I know that now." Eric rubbed his jaw uneasily. "But around here people trust Patricia. She has been HOA president almost 12 years. Half this mountain bought homes through her real estate office." There it was again. Power. Not legal power. Social power. The dangerous kind small towns run on. Patricia did not need people to know the law. She just needed them to trust her version of reality long enough for paperwork to pile up. Eric lowered his voice even further. "You want the honest truth? She has done this before." The diner noise around us suddenly faded in my ears. "What do you mean before?" He stared down into his coffee for a second before answering. 3 years ago, there was an older guy named Walter Briggs. Vietnam veteran. Lived alone farther up the ridge. Patricia kept filing complaints about his property. Junk hazards. Fire risks. Structural neglect. Eventually, county inspectors showed up so many times the old man just gave up and sold cheap. A cold feeling settled into my stomach. And she bought it. Eric nodded slowly. Her nephew did. Then flipped it 6 months later for triple. The smell of frying bacon drifted through the diner while snow thickened outside the windows. I could feel the pieces starting to connect now. Patricia was not some overbearing HOA busybody measuring grass height for fun. She was running a system. Pressure people. Create problems. Control the narrative. Wait for them to crack. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked. Eric gave a tired little shrug. "Because your father helped me 20 years ago after my wife died. Fixed my roof for free before winter. That caught me off guard completely." "You knew my dad?" "Everybody knew your dad," he said quietly. "Good man." For a second, I could almost smell cedar shavings and engine oil again from my father's old workshop back in Colorado Springs. Then Eric reached into his jacket pocket and slid a folded paper napkin across the table. An address was written on it. "What is this?" I asked. "Storage unit." He looked me dead in the eye. "Patricia's son moved furniture into it 2 weeks before they entered your cabin." My pulse kicked hard against my ribs. "Furniture from where?" Eric shook his head. "I do not know, but I saw your fireplace chairs in the back of their trailer." The room suddenly felt hotter even though snow hammered the windows outside. "Those chairs belonged to my parents. I had wrapped them in moving blankets myself before locking the cabin up for winter." Patricia's family had not just entered my property. They had gone through my belongings piece by piece. Eric leaned forward now, voice barely above a whisper. "Listen carefully, Grant. Patricia wants you angry. She wants you yelling. The second you lose your temper, she will tell everybody she was protecting her family from some unstable outsider." He pointed at the deed packet still sitting on the table. "That paper beats her mouth, but only if you stay smarter than she is." I nodded slowly while the old neon beer sign buzzed softly above the counter behind him. Then my phone vibrated again. Another county alert email. I opened it and felt my blood turn to ice. A change of address request had just been filed under my cabin address. New resident listed. Patricia Thornwell's son. The second I saw that change of address request, I stopped thinking emotionally and started thinking like a contractor staring at a cracked foundation. You do not panic. You figure out where the damage started. I left Carson's and drove straight back toward the mountain while snow drifted across the road in thick, white waves. The farther up the ridge I climbed, the quieter everything became. Pine trees swayed slowly in the wind. Power lines hummed overhead. And sitting at the end of my long gravel driveway was a brand new metal mailbox with Patricia's son's name printed across the side in neat black letters. I just stared at it through the windshield for a second. That little mailbox told me everything. They were not squatting temporarily. They were establishing residency step by step. Utilities, mail, community statements. The whole thing was being built like a legal wall around my own property. I parked near the tree line instead of pulling all the way in. Snow crunched softly under my boots while cold wind pushed the smell of fireplace smoke through the trees. Through the cabin windows I could see movement inside again. Somebody walking through my kitchen. Somebody opening cabinets that still held my father's old cast iron pans. My jaw tightened so hard I felt it in my temples. Then I noticed another problem. 2 security cameras had been mounted above the porch since my last visit. Cheap wireless cameras from a hardware store. Patricia was not just moving in. She was documenting herself living there. Smart. Very smart. Most people never understand this part until it is too late. Ownership and occupancy are different things. The sheriff explained it badly the first night, but technically he was right. If somebody claims they live somewhere and shows utility bills and mail, police usually back away until a court sorts it out. That is why people like Patricia move fast. They flood the system with paperwork before the real owner can react. I stayed hidden behind the trees for another minute when suddenly the cabin door opened. Patricia stepped outside holding a mug of coffee while snowflakes drifted around her porch light. She looked completely relaxed, like this mountain belonged to her now. Then she spotted my truck through the trees. Her smile appeared instantly. Not nervous, not surprised, confident. She walked down the porch steps slowly and stopped halfway down the driveway. "Following us now?" she called out casually. I stepped closer into view. "You filed a change of address request under my property." She shrugged one shoulder. "Your property according to who?" The calmness in her voice honestly impressed me a little. Dangerous people rarely scream. They stay comfortable while they lie. "According to county records," I answered. "According to the deed sitting in my truck." Patricia sipped her coffee like we were discussing weather. "Grant, abandoned homes create liability issues for mountain communities. The cabin was empty for 4 months. Long enough for pipes to freeze. Long enough for wildlife damage. Long enough for fire hazards. I could smell fresh cedar smoke coming from my chimney while she talked about my property like I was neglecting it. "You broke into my home," I said flatly. Her smile faded just a little. "Careful," she replied softly. "Accusations like that can get expensive." There it was again. Not fear. A threat wrapped inside polite conversation. Before I could answer, the front door opened again, and her son stepped outside carrying a cardboard box. He froze when he saw me. My stomach dropped instantly because I recognized the box. It held my father's old fishing gear. The same gear I packed into the upstairs closet myself. "Mom," he muttered nervously. Patricia never looked away from me. "Go inside, Daniel." He disappeared immediately. I pointed toward the box before the door shut. "That property belongs to me too." Patricia finally lost a tiny piece of her perfect calm. "Then maybe you should have stayed around to protect it." That sentence hit like ice water because suddenly I understood exactly what she thought of me. In her mind, I was just another outsider from the city. Another divorced guy with money who bought mountain property, then disappeared. She thought I would get frustrated and walk away. Most people probably did. But she had made one mistake already. She underestimated how patient I could be. I took a slow breath and pulled my phone out. "What are you doing?" she asked immediately. "Documenting." Her eyes narrowed slightly for the first time. "You cannot record private conversations without consent. Colorado is one-party consent," I replied calmly. "You should know that as HOA president." Silence. Just wind rattling tree branches overhead. For the first time since this started, Patricia looked annoyed instead of confident. Tiny crack. Tiny opening. Then my phone buzzed again in my hand. Email notification. Summit County Utility Department. I opened it while standing right there in the snow. My electricity account password had just been changed. I stared at that email notification while cold snow melted down the back of my neck. Password changed. Somebody had gone into my utility account and locked me out using my own cabin address. Patricia watched my face carefully from halfway down the driveway. She already knew what the email said. That was the creepy part. This woman was always 3 moves ahead because she had been planning this long before I ever showed up on that mountain road. Problem? She asked softly over the wind. I slipped my phone back into my jacket pocket and looked at her. You were getting sloppy. Her little smile disappeared completely this time. Not angry, just calculating. Like she was deciding whether I had become dangerous yet. You really should stop showing up unannounced, she said calmly. It makes people nervous. I almost laughed again. She had moved strangers into my house, changed locks, redirected mail, touched my family property, and somehow I was the one making people uncomfortable. That is how manipulators work. They flip reality upside down until you start questioning your own common sense. But something else was bothering me now. Something small. The lights inside the cabin flickered for half a second while wind pushed through the trees overhead. Most people would not notice it. I did immediately, because I installed the temporary electrical setup myself after buying the place. The cabin still ran partly off an older backup panel connected to an exterior maintenance box near the woods. Suddenly a memory clicked into place hard enough to make my pulse jump. 3 months earlier, during inspection week, I had mounted a trail camera beside that maintenance box after black bears kept getting into the trash barrels nearby. I had completely forgotten about it. Patricia was still talking when my brain started racing. Families deserve housing too, Grant. You do not get to abandon a property and suddenly demand control whenever you feel like visiting. Abandon. She kept using that word intentionally. I nodded slowly like I was listening while snowflakes drifted between us. Then I backed toward my truck. We are done talking for today, I said calmly. Her eyes narrowed again. That sounds smart. But it was the way she said smart that caught my attention. Condescending. Like she thought I had finally accepted defeat. I drove away slowly, but instead of heading down the mountain, I looped around the back logging road that connected to the north ridge behind the property. Most people did not even know the road existed anymore, because half of it washed out years ago. My truck bounced over frozen ruts while dead pine branches scraped against the doors. The deeper I drove into the woods, the quieter everything became until all I could hear was wind and the low rumble of my engine. Finally, I parked behind a cluster of trees about 200 yards uphill from the cabin. From there, I could barely see smoke rising from my chimney through the snow. My boots sank into fresh powder while I hiked toward the maintenance box hidden near the tree line. The cold air smelled sharp and clean up there. Pine sap, wet bark, snow. My fingers were half numb by the time I reached the metal utility panel. Then I saw it. The trail camera was still there, covered in dirt and pine needles, but untouched. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Slowly, I opened the side latch and pulled the memory card free. If the batteries survived winter weather, there was a chance this little plastic box had recorded everything. I sat inside my truck afterward with the heater blasting while the tiny screen loaded footage clip by clip. Most of it was boring. Snowfall, deer wandering past, one black bear sniffing around, the maintenance box at 3 in the morning. Then the timestamps changed to 2 weeks earlier. And suddenly there she was. Patricia, crystal clear, standing beside my cabin with Daniel and another man carrying bolt cutters and tool bags. My entire body went still. The date stamp sat bright in the corner of the screen. Weeks after I legally purchased the property. Weeks before they claimed the cabin was abandoned. I kept watching. Daniel changed the locks while Patricia pointed toward the porch. Then came the moment that almost made me stop breathing. Patricia handed Daniel a stack of envelopes. He shoved them directly into the new mailbox they had installed. Fake residency evidence. Built by hand. One piece at a time. But the footage kept going. Moving trucks arrived 3 days later. Furniture. Storage bins. My father's chairs carried right through the front door. Then Patricia herself walked outside holding up a framed family photo she had found inside my cabin. She looked directly toward the woods where the camera was hidden and laughed. Actually laughed. He is never coming back, she said. The sound crackled softly through my truck speakers while snow hammered the windshield outside. I just sat there staring at the screen with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Because in that exact moment, everything changed. This was no longer a misunderstanding. No longer some messy property dispute. Patricia Thornwell knowingly broke into my cabin and staged a fake occupancy trail to steal it. And now I finally had proof. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Patricia standing outside my cabin laughing into the snow while my father's picture sat inside behind her. The heater in my motel room rattled nonstop and smelled faintly like burnt dust, but my mind kept replaying the footage over and over. Around 4 in the morning, I finally stopped staring at the ceiling and started making copies. 3 flash drives. 1 cloud upload. 1 email backup to myself. That is another thing people learn too late. If you ever get real evidence, protect it immediately. Because once somebody realizes you can expose them, strange things start happening to files. By sunrise, I was parked outside a law office in Breckenridge holding a cardboard coffee cup that had already gone cold in my hands. Frost covered the sidewalks. Snowplows groaned somewhere down the street. The gold lettering on the office window read Marshall and Keene Property Law. I had found the firm through the title company that handled my closing paperwork. The receptionist looked half asleep when I walked in carrying my deed packet and laptop bag. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked politely. "No," I answered. "But I have video proof somebody staged occupancy fraud inside my home." That woke her up fast. 40 minutes later, I sat across from attorney Rachel Keene while trail camera footage played silently on her office monitor. She watched the whole thing twice without interrupting. No dramatic reactions. No gasps. Just focused silence. Then she leaned back slowly in her chair. "Well," she said calmly, "Patricia Thornwell just made a very expensive mistake." Hearing a lawyer say that felt like finally breathing after being underwater for days. Rachel pointed toward the screen. "This footage destroys any claim of accidental occupancy. She knew you owned the property before entry. Can we remove them?" I asked immediately. She shook her head once. "Not today." My stomach sank again. Rachel raised one finger before I could speak. "But listen carefully. We are not trying to win emotionally. We are trying to win permanently." She explained everything step by step while snow fell outside her office windows. In Colorado, forcing people out physically without a court order could backfire badly, even if I owned the property. Patricia was counting on me losing patience. If I exploded publicly, she would shift the story instantly. Suddenly, she becomes frightened grandmother. I become unstable property owner harassing a family during winter. Rachel understood Patricia immediately. "This woman has done this before," she said flatly. "You can tell by how organized the paper trail is." Then she started building the counterattack. First came emergency filings with the county documenting fraudulent occupancy evidence. Then, utility account disputes. Then certified notices demanding preservation of all HOA communications regarding my property. "What does that mean?" I asked. Rachel gave a small smile. "It means if Patricia deletes emails after today, a judge can treat it as destruction of evidence." That was the first moment I actually felt momentum shift. Rachel typed rapidly while printer paper slid out beside her desk in warm stacks. Legal language. Court references. Filing numbers. Calm, organized pressure. Nothing loud. Nothing emotional. Just systems closing around Patricia piece by piece. Then Rachel suddenly paused while reviewing my closing paperwork. "Hold on," she muttered. "What?" She pointed at the survey map attached to my deed. "Your property includes the private access easement for the entire upper ridge." I frowned. "Okay." Rachel looked up slowly. "Grant, 6 other cabins legally cross your land to reach the mountain road." My brain started catching up immediately. Patricia's family cabin included. Rachel turned the monitor toward me and tapped the map. If the court rules unlawful occupancy, they could lose legal access rights temporarily during the dispute. There it was. The first real crack in Patricia's confidence. She thought this was about one empty house. She never realized the property itself controlled part of the mountain. Rachel printed another stack of documents and handed them across the desk. "Do not confront her anymore alone," she said. "Do not threaten her. Do not touch the property. You stay calm while we document everything." I nodded. What if she keeps changing accounts and moving my belongings? Rachel's expression hardened slightly. Then she keeps digging deeper. By noon, we had filed formal notices with the county clerk, utility companies, and HOA insurance counsel. That last part surprised me. Why notify their insurance? I asked while we walked toward the lobby. Rachel zipped her coat calmly. Because insurance companies hate fraud more than courts do. Outside the office, the cold mountain air hit my face sharp as broken glass. My phone buzzed before I even reached my truck. Unknown number again. I answered carefully. Mr. Holloway, a nervous female voice asked. My name is Tina. I clean vacation rentals for Willow Creek HOA. I leaned against my truck slowly. Okay. She lowered her voice immediately. I think you need to know Patricia has been telling people you are dangerous and unstable. Snow blew across the parking lot while she continued talking fast. She told the HOA board you threatened her grandchildren. But that is not why I called. My stomach tightened again. Then why did you call? There was a long pause on the line before she answered. Because yesterday I saw Patricia shredding documents with your cabin address on them. Tina refused to meet anywhere near the mountain. That alone told me how nervous people were of Patricia Thornwell. We ended up sitting inside a laundromat 20 miles away in Silverthorne while dryers rumbled in the background and the whole place smelled like detergent and wet jackets. Tina looked exhausted. Late 40s maybe. Hair tied back. Chapped hands from years of cleaning rental cabins in mountain winters. She kept glancing toward the windows every few seconds like Patricia might somehow appear out of the snow. I should not even be here, she whispered. I slid a coffee across the plastic table toward her. Then why come? She stared down into the cup for a second before answering. Because what she is doing is wrong. That's simple. No big speech. No drama. Just a tired person finally reaching a limit. Tina explained that Patricia controlled almost everything connected to the HOA. Vacation rentals, cleaning schedules, snow removal contracts, maintenance referrals. If you worked in that mountain community long enough, eventually your paycheck touched Patricia somehow. People stay quiet because they are scared of losing work, Tina admitted softly. Then she leaned closer across the table. But after your lawyer sent those notices yesterday, Patricia panicked. My pulse kicked immediately. What kind of panic? Tina lowered her voice further. She called an emergency HOA board meeting last night. Told everybody you were harassing her family. Of course she did. Rachel predicted that move almost perfectly. The second pressure touched Patricia, she tried. Controlling the narrative again. Tina pulled folded papers from her purse carefully. I took these before she shredded the rest. I unfolded them slowly while dryer doors slammed somewhere behind us. HOA meeting notes. Email printouts. Internal complaints. Then I saw my property address highlighted in yellow marker beside a sentence that made my stomach tighten instantly. Strategic occupancy protection until ownership dispute resolution. I looked up sharply. What is this? Tina swallowed hard. Patricia was coaching her son on how to establish tenant rights. The laundromat suddenly felt too warm. This was planned from the start, I muttered. Tina nodded once. There is more. She pointed toward another page. Look at the date. My eyes locked onto it immediately. 3 weeks before I even closed on the cabin. Patricia had started investigating county vacancy records before my purchase finalized. That meant she was targeting the property while it was still sitting in escrow, hunting for weak spots before ownership transferred completely. My jaw tightened. She expected the sale to fail, I realized aloud. Then when it did not, she adjusted. Tina looked surprised. How did you figure that out? I tapped the papers slowly. Because she switched from claiming the property was dangerous to claiming it was abandoned. Different strategy. Tina stared at me for a second, then gave the tiniest nod. You are calmer than she expected. Funny enough, that might have been the nicest compliment I had heard all week. Most people think winning these situations means getting louder. Real control comes from staying steady while somebody else spirals. Tina reached into her purse one last time and pulled out a flash drive. This came from the HOA office computer backup, she whispered. I copied it before leaving work this morning. I stared at the tiny blue drive in her hand like it was gold. What is on it? Emails mostly, but there was one folder Patricia password locked. My pulse jumped again. Did you open it? Tina shook her head. No, but the folder title said Ridge Acquisition Project. The second she said those words, every piece finally locked together in my head. This was never only about my cabin. Patricia wanted the upper ridge access rights connected to my land. Vacation developers had been circling that mountain area for months. New hiking routes, luxury rentals, expansion permits. My property controlled access roads through half the ridge. She was not stealing one cabin. She was positioning herself to control development leverage. And suddenly her desperation made perfect sense. I drove straight from Silverthorne back to Rachel's office with snow blowing hard enough across the highway that visibility dropped to maybe 30 feet. The entire drive my mind kept replaying one phrase. Ridge Acquisition Project. Rachel plugged the flash drive into her office computer while I paced beside the window. Email after email filled the screen. HOA complaints. Occupancy instructions. Legal templates. Then Rachel suddenly stopped scrolling. Grant, she said quietly. Come look at this. My stomach dropped at her tone. It was an email from Patricia to 3 HOA board members dated 6 weeks earlier. Subject line, Emergency Property Stabilization Plan. Rachel read part of it aloud slowly. If Holloway fails to establish consistent occupancy before winter, we may proceed with temporary family placement strategy to preserve future development opportunities. Silence filled the office after that. Just the soft hum of the heater and snow hitting the windows outside. Rachel looked at me carefully. She put conspiracy to commit fraud in writing. I stared at the screen while anger rolled through my chest like slow fire. Not explosive anger. Worse, cold anger. Controlled anger. Because now I understood exactly who Patricia Thornwell really was. She was not protecting a family. She was protecting a real estate scheme. Then Rachel's office phone rang. She answered calmly, listened for maybe 10 seconds, and slowly looked up at me. That was Summit County, she said. Patricia just filed for emergency residency protection, claiming you threatened to illegally remove her grandchildren from the cabin. The hearing happened 3 days later inside a cramped county building that smelled like wet boots and old coffee. Snow piled against the courthouse windows while people stomped slush across the tile floors outside. I sat beside Rachel at one table holding a legal pad I had not written a single word on because my hands were too tense to stay still. Across the room, Patricia sat with her son Daniel and 2 HOA board members dressed like they were attending a country club brunch instead of a fraud hearing. Patricia even smiled at me when she walked in. That fake calm smile again, like she still thought she controlled the story. But something was different now. She kept checking her phone every couple minutes. Tiny nervous habit. Tiny crack getting wider. The county hearing officer, Judge Halpern, looked exhausted before we even started. White hair. Reading glasses hanging low on his nose. The kind of man who had probably spent 20 years dealing with neighbors fighting over fences and snowplows. Let us keep this simple, he said while flipping through paperwork. This hearing concerns emergency residency protection and disputed occupancy claims. Patricia stood first. Of course she did. Her voice came out soft and polished like she practiced it in a mirror. My family entered an abandoned, unsafe structure to stabilize the property during winter conditions, she explained. Mr. Holloway became aggressive upon arrival and frightened my grandchildren. She dabbed the corner of one eye with a tissue, even though there were no tears. Daniel nodded beside her like a sad little backup singer. Then Patricia made her biggest mistake. The home sat vacant for years, she added confidently. Rachel did not even look at me when she whispered, "There it is." Calmly she stood and rolled a small monitor toward the judge. "Your Honor, before my client responds verbally, we would like to submit verified timestamp footage recorded directly on the property." Patricia's face changed instantly. Not panic yet, but the confidence drained fast. Rachel pressed play. The courtroom went completely silent except for the faint hum of the heater vents overhead. Everybody watched Patricia appear on screen beside my cabin weeks before she claimed emergency occupancy began. They watched Daniel cut the locks. They watched Patricia hand over fake mail. Then her own voice crackled through the speakers. "He is never coming back." Nobody spoke for several seconds after the video ended. Even the judge stopped flipping papers. Patricia finally cleared her throat awkwardly. "That footage lacks context." Rachel slid another stack of documents forward immediately. "Then perhaps the email evidence will help with context." One by one she laid everything out. HOA internal emails. Strategic occupancy plans. The Ridge Acquisition Project folder. Utility transfer attempts. Residency staging instructions. Every single thing Patricia thought she deleted or controlled now sat spread across the judge's desk under fluorescent lights. The air inside the room suddenly felt heavy. Daniel looked physically sick. One HOA board member quietly pushed his chair away from Patricia, like touching the same table might become dangerous. Then Judge Halpern adjusted his glasses slowly and looked directly at Patricia. "Mrs. Thornwell," he said carefully, "did you knowingly enter this property without owner authorization?" Patricia's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. For the first time since this nightmare started, she had no polished answer ready. We believe the property was abandoned, she finally muttered weakly. Rachel spoke immediately. Even after county records confirmed ownership? Silence. Judge Halpern leaned back slowly in his chair while snow tapped softly against the courthouse windows. I am issuing immediate suspension of residency protections pending fraud investigation, he said firmly. Daniel looked at Patricia in total shock. Mom, he whispered. But the judge was not done. Furthermore, all access claims associated with the disputed occupancy are hereby frozen until reviewed by county property enforcement. That was the moment Patricia finally understood the Mountain Road problem. Her entire family cabin access route crossed my land easement. Her face turned pale almost instantly. You cannot do that, she snapped suddenly. Families live up there. Judge Halpern stared at her over his glasses. Families should not establish residency through fraudulent entry either. Rachel stayed perfectly calm beside me while Patricia's whole polished image cracked apart in real time. Then came the final blow. A county investigator entered the courtroom carrying another file folder and quietly handed it to the judge. He opened it, frowned, then looked directly at Patricia again. Interesting, he muttered. My pulse jumped hard. It appears your HOA insurance carrier has also opened an investigation regarding undeclared property acquisition activities. Patricia looked like somebody drained all the blood from her body. She turned toward her attorney, but even he suddenly seemed interested in his own paperwork instead of helping her. The hearing ended 20 minutes later with emergency orders restoring my utility control and authorizing sheriff supervision for property recovery. When we stepped outside the courthouse, cold mountain wind blasted snow across the parking lot. Patricia walked out behind us, surrounded by silence instead of supporters now. No smiling board members. No fake sympathy. Just nervous distance. She stopped near the courthouse steps and looked at me with pure hatred for the first time. You think you won? She hissed quietly. I looked at her for a long second while snow drifted between us. Then I answered honestly. No. I think you finally got caught. The sheriff met me at the bottom of the mountain road 2 days later, just after sunrise. Fresh snow covered everything in a clean white layer that made the whole ridge look peaceful again. Funny how nature can make ugly situations look beautiful from far away. Sheriff Donnelly stepped out of his cruiser, holding a clipboard and a thermos of coffee. His breath fogged in the freezing air while he walked over to my truck. Morning, Mr. Holloway, he said quietly. Very different tone now. No more civil dispute language. No more uncomfortable shrugging. Just professional. Respectful. Amazing what evidence does to people. Behind him sat another county vehicle and a locksmith van idling near the road shoulder. The smell of diesel drifted through the cold air while snow squeaked under our boots. They were notified last night, Donnelly explained. This should stay peaceful. I nodded once and looked up. Toward the ridge. Smoke still rose from my chimney. But not for much longer. We drove up together slowly through the pine trees while morning light broke across the mountains. I had imagined this moment 100 different ways during the past week. Angry, emotional, satisfying. But honestly, by then I mostly just felt tired. Tired of paperwork. Tired of lies. Tired of strangers touching pieces of my family history like they belonged to them. When we reached the cabin, Patricia's Suburban was already packed. Suitcases stacked near the porch. Daniel stood outside loading bins into the back while 2 little kids sat silently in the rear seats watching cartoons on a tablet. Patricia stepped onto the porch the second she saw us arrive. No cashmere sweater this time. No fake smile either. Just a hard expression and tired eyes. Sheriff Donnelly approached first. Mrs. Thornwell, he said calmly. The county order has been finalized. Occupancy rights are suspended pending investigation. You need to vacate the property today. Patricia crossed her arms tightly against the cold. This is harassment. Donnelly barely reacted. Ma'am, please do not make this harder than it already is. She looked straight at me then. Pure bitterness. You really enjoy this? She asked. The crazy thing was I did not. Not even a little. Because standing there looking at those packed boxes and exhausted kids, all I could think about was how many chances Patricia had to stop before this exploded. She could have walked away the first night. She could have apologized. She could have admitted the lie before county investigators got involved. Instead, she kept digging deeper because she thought control mattered more than truth. No, I answered honestly. I just wanted my house back. For a second, something flickered across her face. Not guilt exactly. More like disbelief that somebody refused to play her game anymore. Daniel avoided eye contact the entire time while movers carried bins toward the SUV. At one point, he quietly walked over holding my father's fishing tackle box. The same green metal box I remembered from childhood camping trips. He held it out awkwardly. "Sorry about all this," he muttered without looking up. I took the box carefully. The cold metal felt familiar in my hands. "You should have stayed out of it," I said quietly. He nodded once like he already knew that. Then came the detail that hit hardest. One of the little girls stepped out of the SUV holding the stuffed rabbit I saw through the cabin window the first night. She looked up at me nervously. "Are we in trouble?" she asked softly. Patricia immediately snapped, "Get back in the car." But I crouched down a little first. "No," I told her gently. "None of this is your fault. Kids always pay for adults pretending rules do not apply to them." About 20 minutes later, the locksmith walked up the porch carrying a toolbox. He removed the brass lock Patricia installed and handed it directly to me. The exact same lock that stopped my key from working the first night. Funny how small things come full circle. The new deadbolt clicked into place with a heavy metallic sound that echoed softly through the cold morning air. This time the keys belonged to me again. Legally, publicly, permanently. Patricia watched from the SUV while the sheriff signed final paperwork near his cruiser. Snow drifted slowly across the windshield as her vehicle backed down the driveway for the last time. No dramatic speech. No screaming. Just silence. And honestly, that silence felt better than revenge ever could. After everyone left, I stood alone on the porch for a long minute listening to mountain wind move through the trees. The cabin smelled strange inside at first. Different detergent. Cheap perfume. Microwave food. But underneath all of it, I could still smell cedar wood and fireplace ash. Home was still there waiting underneath the mess. I walked room by room, slowly picking things back up where they belonged. My father's photograph went above the fireplace again. The fishing tackle box returned beside the stairs. The old leather chair got placed back near the window overlooking the ridge. Outside, evening snow started falling again while warm yellow light filled the cabin windows. Same cabin, same mountain, but now the silence felt peaceful instead of stolen. A week later, county investigators officially opened fraud inquiries into Patricia's HOA activities, and 2 board members resigned immediately. Rachel told me more complaints were surfacing from older homeowners across the ridge. Turns out once one person finally pushes back, other people stop being afraid too. And standing there beside my fireplace that night, hearing logs crack softly while snow covered the mountain outside, I realized something important. Justice usually does not arrive loud. It does not kick down doors or make speeches. Most of the time it shows up quietly. In paperwork. In patience. In evidence. In staying calm long enough for the truth to corner the people lying. Patricia thought owning the loudest voice in town made her untouchable. But at the end of the day, the mountain only cared about one thing. Whose name was actually on the deed.